Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. Our goal is to keep you informed, inspired, and a little entertained on all things diabetes. The information contained in the program is based on the experience and opinions of the Integrated Diabetes Services clinical team. Since this is a very individualized condition, please check with your healthcare provider before implementing any of the weird stuff we may happen to share with you today.
Hello there. I am Tavia. I'm a registered nurse and a certified diabetes care and education specialist with Integrated Diabetes Services. And I am joined today by Anna Sabino. Anna, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, Tavia. My name is Anna Sabino. I am also a certified diabetes care and education specialist, have a master's in social work, and thrilled to be here on Think Like a Pancreas.
Awesome. So we are so glad you guys are joining us today for our podcast. We're going to focus some time today talking about experiences of parents or caregivers who are in charge of taking care of, supporting, educating about their child or teenager's type 1 diabetes and what life is really like. Anna, what are the first things that pop into your mind when this topic comes up?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who provides a lot of mental health support, all day long, I think the first thing is just this grief process. So many clients will say to me, and I'm sure you too, Tavia,
Yeah,
I feel like, I'm bringing a newborn home again. Whether it is that sort of traumatic feeling of leaving the hospital with all the millions of unknowns, it really is, a fresh new start and a drastic shift in lifestyle that affects the entire family.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, just depending on the age of the child, how much familiarity somebody may have with the healthcare system in the first place. Like, has that family ever been in a hospital situation before?
Right.
Have they gone to the pharmacy and filled a prescription before? Do they know anyone with type 1 diabetes or not?
Have they even heard that term before?
Right.
I think too, Tavia, you're getting my wheels turning here. There's so much shame and guilt that goes with any type of diagnosis. Is it my fault? Should I have, brought her in sooner? Or how did I miss this? And this sort of grief process of could have, should have, would have, and sort of reliving that trauma is what I spend a lot of time talking with my families about, learning their story and really understanding, wow, this has been such a massive change and really rebirth in this sort of new life. And as someone living with type 1, and I know you are too, for decades, to this day, even as an adult, I always say that the burden of self-advocacy is still the hardest challenge when it comes to diabetes, whether it is like an insurance company or Dexcom. But when you're first diagnosed, it's like, I don't even know what I need. I don't even know what to say.
Right.
Because that burden is so strong.
Absolutely. And you're just, not only are you burdened at the moment of diagnosis with the what to do next, what do I do now, what do I do next? But then there's this amount of fear, right? A huge amount of fear, plus any emotional piece that you might be experiencing if it's in the beginning of maybe still in denial, like this can't be happening to our family, right? This isn't right. Or maybe you jump straight to anger and you're just furious that this is happening to your child. Or one of many other emotions that people go through, it makes the how do I put one foot in front of the other just that much more challenging. And you really can't do one without the other unless you happen to be somebody who, in a pretty traumatic situation or stressful situation, sort of shoves all that down, puts on a strong face, right? Straightens out your spine, and then just says, I'm going to do what needs to be done. Sort of like militant. Go down the checklist, make sure everybody's taken care of. That works for a while until you take a shower or you drive alone in your car or a commercial comes on TV and nobody's looking at you. And then everything comes out, right?
It breaks down.
Sort of surprises a lot of people, I think, if it's the first time that's happened to them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, this is a perfect time to mention one of the main reasons why IDS offers, Time Out for Caregivers, because it speaks to exactly that. It is time out, hold up. What have we just been through? Because oftentimes it's, not right when you're in that crisis mode of, you know, 7, 8 months even, or several weeks where you're like, okay, this is supposed to be hard. It's almost like if you've experienced any type of postpartum, mental health dysregulation, where it's like, okay, it's supposed to be hard in the very beginning, but why is it still hard? And
Yeah.
so when we talk about this Time Out for Caregivers program, really it's a free monthly program where we have an opportunity for people to listen, share their stories, gain knowledge, gain perspective. It's usually a small group. Anything else you want to add on Time Out, Tavia?
I think just to reiterate what you said, one of the main reasons, there are several, but one of the main reasons we created it is because during our clinical visits with clients, we work with many clients who are parents or caregivers of young children, and getting through to where the diabetes management skills, knowledge, techniques are kind of a well-oiled machine so that they're more comfortable and less overwhelming. A piece to that is emotional well-being, and it's just a common experience. I don't want to say common as in boring, but I mean, it happens to every person, but you're the only person experiencing it. So that emotional burden and the weight that people are carrying around gets in the way of them being able to really learn new concepts, execute new skills that might be sort of complex, that aren't super straightforward or easy, very detail-oriented steps that are needed to really navigate type 1 diabetes for many kids. And so if somebody is feeling sorrowful, feeling just super sad, there's just no way that person's brain can learn all about some advanced features of an insulin pump that they're looking at getting their child signed up with, right? Your brain can't do that.
No.
And so you need that emotional support. And a big piece is, I'm the only one. It's just such a common thing that we as diabetes educators were hearing over and over, and processing with people and helping them through the processing phases. They were doing it by themselves. And we thought, okay, I just talked to 4 moms in the last 2 days who said similar things. Why can't we have a space for them to get together where the focus isn't on how do you carb count? What about fiber? What time should I bolus for this? Not the execution of all the steps for diabetes management, but on the caregiver's well-being.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of you hit the nail on the head, Tavia. It is about, it is, yes, the child. I always refer to them, if the child is the one living with type 1, as sort of this team captain. But when a kiddo is 2 or even 12, oftentimes 22, you have a significant role as their number one, co-captain or cheerleader. And if you're not okay emotionally, the likelihood of their blood sugar management is also going to be jeopardized, or not managed in the way where you feel like it, it could be better. And the other thing I would add too is that, just because you feel like you've been at this maybe even for 5, 6 years, like, how come I'm still feeling this way? Like, you're allowed to feel however you want to feel when it comes to diabetes. Like, I say this in a lot of my talks, everyone's sort of schedule of accepting the illness, it's grief is not linear, right? Like,
Right.
You could have one parent or a grandparent or a sibling be all about diabetes, and then, the kiddo could go into sort of burnout mode or just like resistance mode a year in, where mom is at the point of like, okay, trying to grapple with this and in an okay state. And so I think that is true for so much of the aspects of type 1 when it comes to support and how we incorporate everyone's feelings into one, because we can't expect everyone to feel exactly the same way at the same time throughout this journey.
For sure.
And that is such it's an okay thing, but it's very hard to recognize and almost like acknowledge
And live through,
for
really.
family.
So even once you've acknowledged it and you've identified what's going on, if you're a parent and you're ready to roll, like you've grieved, you have accepted it, doesn't mean you like it. Now you're ready to like do the thing.
Well,
But if your spouse is still in denial, then that heaps a lot of burden on you because you have to
yeah.
sort of field reality to your child and handle all of the steps that your spouse isn't ready or willing to participate in. And that weighs heavy as well. It's a common thing that comes up in a lot of our visits too, I think. That situation where in many families there's one primary caregiver that takes the responsibility, the primary responsibility, is another area that we talk through in Time Out for Caregivers. In fact, sometimes we have sessions that are just geared on how do I distribute that weight a little bit? Like,
Yeah.
how do I give this up and keep my child safe? Because that's of primary importance. And the other piece is all the fears. I think there's just so many. As a parent of any child, we can all list out a million fears we have about our kids' well-being and safety, right? Then you throw type 1 diabetes on top of it, and now you have a whole new list, right?
Deep breath, everyone. Deep breath.
Yeah.
Parents listening. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, when you'll hear me say this a lot. I think you've probably heard me say it too many times, really. One of the things that we see is people are coming into our visits from a fear-based perspective, all the what ifs and what they're worried about. And many times it's not reality-based, but they don't know that. No one's told them, and they don't have the science behind what they're worried about. So then out of target glucose levels, like a hypoglycemia episode one afternoon or a couple of days where their child is growing and their glucose is just off the charts elevated, they're thinking in their mind all of these terrible things that are probably happening to their child's future. And that's not really reality-based. I think that's a huge stress relief when we can get there and really dissect, like, what really leads to long-term complications for people and what doesn't. And what does every single blood sugar actually mean over lifespan? And what doesn't it mean? I feel like that's a really big package that needs to be unwrapped for a lot of people so that they can look at that with
the huge one. And honestly, Tavia, that is why we do what we do, right? As clinicians, we're not in and out for 15 minutes because, again, these parents are making these dosing decisions, right? And I think just to sort of like acknowledge what is reality, I mean, we're expecting our parents, I mean, and ourselves, but we're talking about parents here, to basically play the role of an additional organ. You know, we have our brain, and our brain is just like working in overdrive with type 1, but we're also trying to mimic the hormone of insulin and fight all the other hormones that are playing along with it too, like cortisol and adrenaline and glucagon too, at the same time without a medical degree. So it is a massive shift. And this is the first time for many of these parents ever where they're able to A, share what's on their mind, and B, have someone process it. Because even if, and I love when people tell me that they're already in therapy, which is great, even if you've been seeing a therapist or some type of mental health support, 9 times out of 10, parents will say to me, but like, they don't get diabetes, but they don't get diabetes. And if you don't have someone who is so incredibly supportive of you that just gets it, of course you're going to hide it. Of course, like you're going to mask everything that is in here that you're trying to direct and control for someone else. Like, it's insanity to think how much work that parents especially have to do with their kids. Like, maybe your kid's at school and you're like, well, I don't know. Did they decide to buy lunch today? I don't know what they ate. Well, they're growing up, so I hope the nurse looks like they give them insulin. I don't know. It's a lot of what if and a lot of self-doubt. But I hope if you're listening, you will maybe join us at one of our next Time Out programs, because you can really unleash some of these emotions into a space where everyone truly does get it.
Absolutely. And another topic that comes up a lot in my visits is how to transition over time. No, not right after a new diagnosis, but over time. How do you transition some of the self-care steps that are needed every day to the child who's growing up with type 1 diabetes? And as a parent, what's their responsibility? What's the child's responsibility? How do you do that sort of gracefully with less fighting and not stressing people out? How much should I push on this? Or how can we approach this so I don't stress them out? That comes up really often. And I think it's a really important topic because as a person who's not living with type 1 diabetes, trying to manage another human body's diabetes, that's a time-limited experience, right? So your whole goal as a parent is to raise a healthy child who can get out and participate in the rest of their life. So you can't follow them around for the rest of their life saying, that's 8 grams of carbs. Do this kind of bolus for that 46 grams of carbs that you're going to eat at 7 p.m. tonight, right? And set an alarm at 2 a.m. and see how your glucose is. You can't, they wouldn't want you to do that, and you can't do that forever. So shifting through that, super stressful for a lot of families.
Yeah, I think honestly, that is what I spend the majority of my sessions on, is how do I talk these parents off of a fear cliff when it comes to their thought about kiddo going away to school and having a severe low in the middle of the night, or God forbid, studying abroad, or getting on an airplane to go visit a relative somewhere when they're a teenager. It's what it is this concept of new, because every time we're making these, little bitty jumps towards that, like, complete independence, however you want to define that, because it looks different for everyone, it's new. And I think that we don't recognize enough that, like, it's hard when it's new, right? The first week of school, that's a transition. That's hard. We're still in like the first month of school, and that's hard. So we have to acknowledge that, the first time you get behind the wheel, or the first time you're adding something different to a diabetes routine, it's also going to be like a challenge for everyone. And I think the regardless of like getting a kid to understand bolusing, it comes down to communication. And I think it's so much more important for, the parent-child relationship, for like long-term maintenance, for that to be, the pivotal part of that transition, like strong communication and boundaries, rather than, how many carbs are in 3 apple slices. Because that's like Google concrete. You can look that up. But when it comes to building support and foundation and encouragement, my biggest piece of advice is like, make sure you're communicating with your kid in a way that you are empowering them to have critical thinking skills. Because that is what, for me anyway, and I know for kids, like, maintaining that relationship with their parents is key to, building that ability to self-advocate and maintain those skills for life.
For sure. And I think sometimes as a parent, it doesn't come naturally, because you can see, if you just A and B, then you'd have C. Like, why can't you A and B every day? Why
and
are
we all know diabetes
is
not like that, right? Oh, if you just pre-bolused, everything would be great.
Everything would be great.
Well, no, like, there's 100 other reasons why your blood sugar could have done this. And again, too, when we talk about, like, the roles, diabetes is always the one to blame. Oh, there's that silly diabetes again, doing what it wants to do, coming out of the woodwork. It's so easy to pinpoint a person than it is to pinpoint like an illness.
Yeah. Like my son, for example, last week, maybe that was Monday. Time just flies, and I don't remember what day. But someday recently,
Today's
It
Wednesday.
was Monday. It was Monday. So Monday, his glucose was down in the 50s at like 5 a.m. And thinking about it later, it likely was because we did a hike in the afternoon and then he played soccer for an hour and a half in the evening. And so he was just more sensitive to insulin overnight than he typically is. So we fixed that problem and he ate breakfast and took his insulin and he was 42 at 5 minutes to 8 when school was supposed to start. It was the lowest glucose he's had in a long time and like out of the blue. None of us saw it coming. And so in that moment, my first thought was, did he eat his breakfast? Did he take his bolus and not eat breakfast? Because that must be what caused it, right? So I get in my mom head.
It has to be a human error.
Absolutely.
Right?
I text him and he's like, of course I ate breakfast. Why are you even asking me that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, sorry, mom. It's a mom thing.
Yeah.
So he had to sit with the nurse and miss like 35 minutes of class and wait for his glucose to come back after he treated it, right? But it's just it's so easy to flip into like, what did you do? Why did you do that? How did that happen? Even for me, and I'm trained on this stuff, right? So, then later I had to apologize to him. Like, I didn't mean to ask it that way. I was thinking in my head 4 more steps ahead. If you hadn't eaten, do I need to bring you something? Do you have something? Like, I was going down a whole list. Not that I doubt your ability to self-manage. That wasn't it.
Yeah.
And I got an eye roll and an okay, mom. So, we're back on track that way.
And I think we have to expect pushback in these pivotal teen years, right? I mean, it took me, I think, 5 different attempts to communicate with my children this morning about teeth brushing. And it's on their sort of, routine chart. Do they look at the chart? Questionable. But they know it's muscle memory. They know they have to do it. It's part of their morning. They just didn't want to do it. And I think we all sort of fight this battle. It's just when it's something like diabetes and we spend so much time overcompensating, I think, our fears and worries in terms of how are they coping. It's really about us as caregivers. Like, okay, time out. Again, time out. But how are we coping? Because how we're coping is obviously going to impact how we communicate about how we think they're coping, but they might be completely separate. And I think we don't do a good enough job at recognizing that, the root of the issue, a lot of it lies in our own fears and not the kids' fears and anxieties. Like you said earlier, let's do a reality check. Is it actually true?
Yeah. It's important because our brains are pretty powerful and and if you have a really good imagination, I mean, you can go down a path and just keep building it and building it. And then that's harder to get back from. So reality checks are important. I think another struggle that I see commonly is after diagnosis, you go through this period of time, especially if you don't know other families. I think this experience seems to be different from what people have communicated during my visits with them. If they happen to know other families with kids with type 1, like if it's in their family, so their cousin has type 1 or their neighbor happens to, or somebody in their church group or something, right? And they feel comfortable talking with those parents and the kid has other people that they see at least semi-regularly that are checking blood sugars or wearing a sensor or a pump or something. But for those who don't have that experience, I've seen where there's this process that happens where they attempt to share with their normal friends and family that they share other things with. Like you have a friend probably that you could say, these really frustrating things happened to me today at work. And you've got that person that you go to. Or like I went to the grocery store and this really frustrating thing happened while on my drive. So there's certain people in your life that you relate frustrating things and challenging things. Or I'm really overwhelmed right now in my life. You have your people, right? So then you come to them with type 1 diabetes. But because of where we're at as a parent processing this, we tend to over-explain and we try to tell them. Or the person hearing our message, they're in the fix-it state. So they're like, well, you'll just get through it. Or it was just a 5-minute thing. It'll be better tomorrow. Well, no, it won't because diabetes is still here tomorrow, right? So then you get people
you're
get
not
like,
you're not receiving the same type of information. B, it's like not your kid. And we like, that's a whole thing. So
yeah,
where do you even begin?
yeah,
You've basically just spent 3 maybe days or 2 days or a handful of days getting a crash course in the science of diabetes. But now you have a life of applied science.
yeah,
Now you have a life of like application, and it's going to take you a whole year of application for your regularly scheduled program. Oh, well, we've never done swimming before with type 1. Oh, well, we've never
you've
done
never gone to a
Halloween
water
with
park,
1. Oh, we've never done
vacation.
showering, a birthday party, like all the things. Diabetes is on a leash with you for life. So that, those first few months, like it's a roller coaster, and it is supposed to be, it's kind of like motherhood. People will say, oh, it gets easier over time. And like, it's true. I have 2 kids. My second one was definitely easier just because I knew what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But it is so, so critical to be in touch with your own emotions and feel comfortable asking for help, because diabetes does warrant a lot of attention. And if parents are not sleeping, we are not going to be nice people to our kids. And then our kids are not going to behave the way we want them to, or that they want to themselves. And it is just a vicious cycle of frustration and blame and shame and all of that.
Yeah. And I think,
Where would you tell people who are maybe like 3 days out from diagnosis and they're like going to Dr. Google? Where do we, other than IDS, obviously, Integrated Diabetes Services, but where else do we know that people are turning to either right after diagnosis, whether you're 3, 13, 33? We have patients of all ages.
yeah, I think it depends on what somebody's main focus of interest is. Are they looking for therapeutics? Are they looking for more evidence on some specific topic? If so, then I'll route them to an appropriate, like an NIH study, or maybe the American Diabetes Association's clinical guidelines, one excerpt from it that outlines that particular piece that they're puzzling out. If they're looking for, aside from visits with our team, of course, then I typically send people to Juicebox Podcast, and with some caveats, right? Like, here's what you're talking about. And a lot of times you can search and there's a short list. Like, these episodes go through initial diagnosis and what you're going to go through and so on and so forth. And then from there, they refer to other resources and programs. And then people start looking, like Children with Diabetes is a good one. And I think that the now called Breakthrough T1D, that used to be JDRF, is an excellent one, in that there may be other families living in the same region as you that may be already interacting. And there are some resources, educational resources that they have for free, but also a point of contact. And you can find out what is available locally, plus virtually. Those are other ones.
Yeah.
What about you?
I mean, all of those. I agree. I think because of the pandemic, so much of our support is leaned online and virtually, which is great, especially in those first several weeks where you are just head down in an emotional wreck. But some people, they've got to go back to work and they've got to figure it all out. I think you don't have to look far and wide to find good support. And I think from a local perspective, it is so incredibly important to find local support and meetups. And that is where, I always recommend, social media with caution, but, be ready to put on the brakes if you're not getting what you need from it and you're giving more than what you really are receiving when it comes to the information from social media. So I would actually recommend, if you go to like Boston Children's or Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, a lot of them have Facebook groups or where you could hi, my name is so-and-so. We were just diagnosed. Please PM me if you have a kiddo in one of these surrounding towns. I would love to pick your brain. And it is a great way to meet people in your own individual community. God forbid for supply share or whatnot. But knowing you have some local support is so, so incredibly important. The other thing that I don't think you mentioned was just camps and in-person conferences. Virtual is great, but there's not, like you said, there's nothing better than like seeing a T1D in the wild and being like, oh my God, they have a sensor, or, gosh, they have a pump tubing. And I even have like my college roommates now be like, tubing spotted at the mall, like 30. I'm like, oh, you guys are great. So, going to diabetes camp or family programs or weekend events, they exist. Sometimes you have to dig and find the right, schedules and things that work for you. And you'll have to work a little bit to find them. But it is out there and so incredibly important to build that early and often as you navigate, all of the different transitions that come with type 1.
I thought of a couple more while you were talking, and I was listening, of course.
Yeah.
But also, Mom's Night Out is a great one.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Mom's Night Out.
Late.
Next one's coming up in October. I think that's the last one for 2024, but it's in Philadelphia, and it's like a sleepover for moms at a hotel. I'll actually be at that one along with Alicia Downs from our office, doing these sort of like mental health check-ins where people can book time with us to just sort of share what's going on and offer some resources and support. But support is out there. Don't be afraid to find like a therapist, and don't be afraid to keep searching if you don't like the support you're getting.
Absolutely. I agree. It's so important. So I don't usually boss people around and tell them what to do and not. But in this case, I will say, if you've been dealing with navigating type 1 on your own and you haven't yet gotten any type of mental health support, it's just such a game changer for so many people. I highly encourage that if you can do it, that just try it out. You might be surprised at how much negative emotions you're sort of squeezing in if they aren't bubbling over at the surface, so it's painfully obvious for you. But just having that ability to interact with somebody that understands where you're coming from and get some support while you navigate some of the complex emotions of dealing with your own type 1 diabetes or that of your child, there's just nothing like it.
There's nothing like it. And just because you need it now may not mean that you need it in 6 months or in 5 years. It doesn't have to be. It's not like your endocrinology visit where you're going to go for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
There's going to be times where mental health support is going to be hopefully a more prominent part of your world. And don't fight your head in thinking that you don't need it, because no one has ever said to me, I wish I waited longer to reach out for, one-on-one session. That being said, I'm also going to do a little plug that I offer a 15-minute, free consultation. So if you feel like you don't know or you're unsure, we always offer an opportunity to connect with, myself, just to kind of share your emotions and see what the right direction is for future support with us.
Any last thoughts that you want to impart, or because I feel like we shared quite a bit?
I mean, honestly, I think it's find your support and keep them close, because they are going to be the people that you may end up leaning on for decades. This weekend I'm going to a diabetes camp reunion, and some of these people I haven't seen in 20 years, and I can't wait. Some people may call it a cult. It is, but they're my people, and they understand me in a way in which not a lot of other people do. So it is a great atmosphere to be at, even for 48 hours.
Beautiful. Thank you so much,
Tavia?
Anna. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Love doing these.
We'll talk soon.
Okay.